If I can find it in my notes. Here it is. Paul writes this. He says, consequently, you are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household. I'll start reading this again, but I want you to listen to all the combination words, the gathering words, like household and being together and building, the words that are pictures of people coming together. It says this, but you're fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets with Jesus Christ himself as the chief cornerstone. In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you two are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. Did you catch what he was saying here? He's saying each individual believer is incredibly valuable. To God, you are incredibly valuable. Let's not downplay your salvation by any means. Incredibly valuable to God. He died for each one of us. Praise be. And each of us, symbolically, are like these bricks along the side of the wall, that God is taking each one of us and using us to build us together into this body, into this building that glorifies him. And it's only in combining them all together that we're able to complete this building. If we had a couple bricks missing over here, and we had a hole in the wall, nobody would walk in and say, hey, the building is complete. You'd walk in and first thing you'd say is, hey, there's a hole in the wall. What's missing? Do we do that when we walk in the sanctuary, when we look around and we say, hold on, there's a hole over here in these pews where so-and-so normally sits. They're missing. We're not complete today. That would be my hope. Look at the spiritual gifts that God has given each of us. Almost all of the gifts are best used in connection with the church. What good is wisdom or knowledge for just one person? Can you sit at home and prophesy to yourself or teach yourself? What good is hospitality if it's not being shared? Speaking in tongues and interpreting tongues and healing and discernment and encouraging and showing mercy and leading and giving generously. They're all gifts of the Spirit. And they're all fully utilized when used in the context of the church. When Paul is talking about the gifts in 1 Corinthians 14, he talks about them in the context of, hey, when you guys are together in the church, here's how you do this and here's how you do that. What is the point of the gift if there is no church? And what is the point of the gift if you stay away from the church? In our current culture, we have the blessing of being able to hear God's word through many different talented speakers and many different talented teachers, men that God has clearly blessed with knowledge and understanding on his word. You can find them broadcast on stations every day on TV. You can find them on your streaming services. You can turn on your radio and hear very good, godly men with incredible teaching. We can sit at home and hear incredibly talented musicians and songwriters glorifying God with their talents. The problem again arises when we trade those shadows for the reality right here. We cannot trade the shadow for the reality. And the reality is God's gathered people. Since when has church been reduced to a sermon and some songs? There's power in those things taking place in the gathered setting. And let's not trade the reality for that shadow again. Let's not allow experiencing God as a gathered body to be replaced by a televised worshiptainment. You can definitely still watch Billy Graham crusades. That's okay. You can still watch Hillsong United. That's okay. You can listen to those. That's good. I'm not saying those are bad by any means. We just have to be careful that we don't allow those to replace, to do away with what we're doing here today, because this has power. Let's make this a little bit more personal. I saw a quote this week that I'd like to share with you that I really hate, but I'm going to show it to you anyways. When church is optional for parents, it will usually be absent in the lives of the next generation. You know, people make their own decisions. Kids grow up and they choose. And we can pray for them and we can show them the best way. But why not help them make the right decision? When church becomes optional, the next generation becomes absent. This is where the lie of the quarantine has done the most damage to the believer. And I'm not saying the quarantine is bad, but I am saying that it has made us comfortable with sitting at home and avoiding others and giving us the shadow of a church service, of telling us that we can replace reality with a televised product. Do you remember, and you probably got really annoyed at me, and that's okay, but at the end of our Zoom meetings, whenever we would do it as a church, I'd say, all right, now turn your webcams on, and we would turn them on, and we'd all see each other. And I know that was annoying for some of you, and that's okay. That's okay. It was annoying for me too. No, it wasn't for me, because I'm just standing here. But for you, it probably was. But you know what? It was seeing the church again. It was reminding you, this isn't just a video that I'm watching. I am watching this with the believers, and this is the best we can do right now, to be with each other, digitally, online. We have to do that. But I made you turn them on so that we could see each other, so that we could know I'm not alone, and the body is still here. The church is essential, and we have to be intentional in our attitudes and in our hearts, in our emotions, in our time and our efforts, and in our communication, in our fellowship, and in making sure that our families are here. What do you need to do to be more engaged in our church? Here's where I start asking a series of questions. What do you need to do to be more engaged in our church? And let me be very, very clear. The church does not save. Jesus does that. But it's here that we get to see Jesus work. And it's here that we get to hear what Jesus has to do, and we get encouraged by what Jesus is doing in the lives of the people around us. It's here as a body of believers that we get to praise Jesus and worship him, that we get to sing about him, that we get to talk to him, that we get to pray for one another, that we get to go at the end of the hallway and have a discussion about what sin looks like and how that's rebellion against God, that we get to send our kids here so they can learn about who God is. What do you need to do to be more engaged with our body of believers? What does being intentional mean to you while you're here? What would it look like for you to be more intentional, more engaged in the church? What's the next step that you need to take to be more locked in how we're reaching the lost and ministering to the saints here? Because I think that's the dual purpose, reaching the lost and then ministering to one another here. And if you've been replacing the reality of the assembled saints of God with a shadow, how can you bring life back into your relationship with God? Don't wait for somebody else to show you how to engage with the church body. Actively seek it out as a way to be a blessing to our church, to somebody else. It's time to embrace the truth. And this is an old quote by an old saint. I want to say Augustine, I'm not quite sure. But a person can't have God as their father if they don't have the church as their mother. It's a weird picture, but it makes you think. Have I neglected the assembly of the saints? Am I being intentional in my walk, not just with the Lord, but engaging with God's people that he has put with me? Let's go before the Lord as we close and as we worship, as we sing to him. We're going to sing a song here in a little bit, and I think that, is somebody else going to talk about it, I think? Maybe not, so I will. And the point of the song really is to pour out a blessing upon each of you. And it's heavily, heavily scripturally based. And that would be our prayer for you, that we could be engaging together as God's people, but also pouring out a blessing upon each of you. So let's go before the Lord. Let's spend just a few moments in the quiet listening and talking to him. And I'll put these questions back up on the board for you. What do you need to do to be more engaged in the church? What would it look like to be more intentional? And this isn't, where have I failed, God? But rather, God, what is the next step? How can I progress in my faith? How can I bless the church that I'm a part of? Let's go before the Lord. Let's spend about 30 seconds in the quiet, waiting upon him, and then we'll close in song together.